My son-in-law handed me a padded envelope on a Thursday morning in March and asked if I could leave it on the kitchen counter until he got back from his errand. He said he'd forgotten something in the car and would only be a few minutes. I set the envelope down without a second thought, poured myself another cup of coffee, and went back to the crossword I'd been working on since 6:30. I didn't think about it again until my daughter came home from her hospital shift around noon and asked what was in it. I told her I didn't know. She turned it over in her hands, looked at the name written on the front, and said, "Dad, this has your name on it." I told her to go ahead and open it if she wanted. She took it to the kitchen table, and I went back to my puzzle. 11 minutes later, I know because I checked the clock when the sound hit me. My daughter made a noise I had never heard from her before. Not a scream, more like the sound of something structural giving way. I was on my feet before I understood why. She was sitting on the kitchen floor with the contents of the envelope spread around her. Photographs, documents, a handwritten letter on 3 sheets of loose leaf paper. Her face was the color of old paper, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was small, and something had frightened her badly enough that she couldn't find words for it. My son-in-law had not come back from his errand. He wasn't answering his phone. That was 6 months ago. I'm 64 years old, retired 2 years now after 31 years as a claims investigator for a regional insurance company headquartered in Nashville. I spent my entire adult life looking at damage and deciding what it was worth. I knew how to read a scene, how to follow a paper trail, how to separate what was actually there from what people wanted you to believe was there. I had a reputation for being thorough and fair, and I carried that reputation the way a man carries a good name, quietly, without examining it too closely. The bitter irony is that the one case I didn't examine closely enough was the one that had been waiting all this time to come back and take everything apart. My wife passed 26 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 61 years old and she had not finished her garden. The raised beds she built along the back fence are still there. I haven't touched them. Every spring I think about it. But there's a version of grief that expresses itself as preservation. You keep things exactly as they were because changing them feels like a second burial. I water what comes up on its own. That's all I've managed. My daughter is 33. She's a respiratory therapist at a hospital in Brentwood, and she married my son-in-law 4 years ago in a ceremony at a state park outside the city on a Sunday in October when the trees were doing everything they could with the light. I liked him. I want to say that plainly. I liked him from the first time she brought him to Sunday dinner. He was easy to talk to, laughed at the right things, and had a quiet way of paying attention to people that you don't see as often as you should. He helped me clean out the garage after my wife died without being asked. He showed up with coffee and didn't make it a moment. He just worked. I had no reason not to trust him. I have spent a great deal of time in the past 6 months turning that sentence over in my hands, looking for where it went wrong. The handwritten letter was addressed to me. It was dated the evening before. Wednesday night, written while I was asleep 10 feet down the hall, while my daughter worked a night shift, and had no idea he was sitting at the kitchen table writing 3 pages to the man whose house he'd been staying in for 4 days. He had planned to be gone before I woke up. The envelope was supposed to be found later, after he'd put enough distance between himself and Nashville that finding him would take effort. He hadn't counted on me still being up at 6:30, and him needing an excuse to buy himself time to reach the interstate. I set it on the counter without a second thought. That is the part that stays with me. The letter opened with 2 sentences I have read so many times since that I could recite them without effort. I want you to know I am not writing this out of hate. I was, for a long time, but I'm not anymore, and I think that's the only reason I'm able to write it at all. His father's name was Albert Devin Moss. He was 41 years old in the fall of 2006, when their house in Clarksville caught fire on a November night. His wife and 2 kids were home. They got out. The house did not survive. The fire investigators' report cited undetermined origin. Their homeowner's claim was submitted to my company 4 days after the fire. It was assigned to me. I remember the Moss file. That is the truth, and it is not a comfortable truth. I remember it because it was one of the larger residential claims on my desk that year. I drove up to Clarksville on a Wednesday in December and walked the site with a clipboard and a camera, and the field report I'd been handed by my supervisor, a man I'd worked under for 11 years, a man I believed was thorough and fair, the same words I used about myself. What I saw at the site was a house that had burned hot and fast from a point of origin in the back utility room. I took photographs. I took notes. My handwritten notes from that afternoon, the ones I kept in my field journal, the one I was legally required to maintain, said, "Probable electrical fault, junction box area, recommend independent verification before conclusion." That was what I wrote. I remember writing it. What appeared in the final claim denial letter, signed by me and sent to Albert Moss's family 6 weeks later, was investigation findings consistent with intentional fire, claim denied pursuant to policy section 14B, fraud referral submitted to state. I did not write that. I never saw a draft. My supervisor told me the claim had been reviewed at the regional level and the determination had been made. I signed the letter. I did not read it carefully enough to catch what had changed. I trusted the process. I trusted the man. I was wrong on both counts, and a family paid for it in a way I have no adequate words for. Albert Moss was tried for arson fraud in the spring of 2007. The claims denial letter and the fraud referral from my company were central to the prosecution's case. He was convicted that October, sentenced to 8 years, served 6. He came home in 2013 to a wife who had held things together with 2 jobs and pure stubbornness, and children who had grown up without him. He never fully came back from it, his son wrote, not in the way that counts. He died of a heart attack in 2017 at 52 years old. His son was 19. His son was my son-in-law. Not the name I knew him by. He had changed it legally when he turned 21. His real name, his father's name, was in that envelope alongside everything else. The conviction records, the news articles, a copy of my company's original fraud referral with my signature on it, and a printed photograph of Albert Moss taken sometime before 2006, a man in a work jacket standing in front of a house that was still standing. He looked like a man who expected to be around for a while. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after my daughter went upstairs. She didn't ask me to explain. She understood from the look on my face when I read that letter that I had recognized the name, that this was not entirely a surprise to me in the way it might have been to someone with nothing to account for. She went upstairs, and she closed the door, and she didn't come down for the rest of the day. He had built this slowly. His son wrote that he'd found my name when he was 22, going through his father's papers. He'd spent 2 years confirming it. He'd moved to Nashville. He'd found my daughter through the kind of overlapping social geography that a city this size makes possible. A friend of a friend, a volunteer event, nothing that looked engineered from the outside. He had not planned to fall in love with her. He wrote that 3 times in different ways, as if he wasn't sure I'd believe it once. I did not plan to love her. I don't know what to do with that. He had planned, originally, to expose me publicly, to bring the documents to a journalist or a state agency and let the machinery of consequence handle the rest. But months had passed, and then a year, and then they were engaged, and he had tried to find a way out of the plan that didn't require him to also find a way out of the marriage. He hadn't managed either one. And so he'd written the letter, packed the envelope, and decided the least he could do was hand me the thing himself, instead of mailing it to a stranger. Tell me, wherever you're watching from, does that make him a man who tried to do right at the end, or a man who ran out of courage right when it counted most? Drop your city in the comments. Let's talk about it. This story has further to go, and I want to know you're with me. The boxes were in the garage. This is the part that had kept me from sleeping since the night I read that letter, because I had known, somewhere in the back of my mind, for 20 years, that those boxes were in the garage. I had never gone back through them. I had moved them from house to house twice in 30 years, wrapped in plastic sheeting, labeled Field Records, pre-2010 in my wife's handwriting because she had been the one who kept things organized when I couldn't face organizing them myself. She had never asked me what was in them. Or maybe she had asked once, and I'd said something vague about work records I was legally required to retain, and she'd accepted that, and we'd both moved on to whatever needed doing that day. That's how things accumulate, not through drama, through a long, unbroken series of ordinary days in which you don't examine what you're carrying. I went out to the garage at 2 a.m. on a Friday 3 days after the envelope. My daughter was still in the house. but we were moving around each other with the careful distance of two people not yet ready to say what needs saying. I didn't tell her where I was going. I found the boxes on the third shelf, where they had been sitting since we moved to this house in 2014, and I carried them inside one at a time and stacked them on the kitchen table, and began going through them with the same patient system I'd applied to every claim I'd ever worked. The field journal from 2006 was in the second box. My handwriting, December 14th, the Clarksville site. 4 pages of notes in the compressed script I'd used in the field for 20 years. Probable electrical fault, junction box area. Recommend independent verification. The words were exactly as I'd remembered them. I had not invented a more comfortable version. The notes said what I believed they said. What the notes also showed, and this is what I had not allowed myself to think about in the years since, was a second entry 2 days later. December 16th, a phone call with my supervisor. Notes in the margin. Supervisor says regional review complete. Final determination made. Proceed with denial and referral. And then below that, in smaller writing, that I could see I had written and then partially erased and then written again. Did not see regional review documentation. Should request. And then nothing. No follow-up. No request for documentation. No independent verification. The entry where I had thought about doing the right thing, and had not done it. Not because I was corrupt. Not because I had any financial stake in the outcome. Because I was tired that December, and the caseload was heavy, and my supervisor was a man I'd worked beside for 11 years, and asking for documentation would have felt like an accusation, and I didn't want to be the kind of person who accused someone he trusted. I wanted to be reasonable. I wanted to get through December. Albert Moss spent 6 years in a Tennessee correctional facility because I wanted to get through December. That is a fact I cannot make softer than it is. I have tried. It doesn't get softer. Before I tell you what I found when I looked up my former supervisor's name in the Department of Commerce and Insurance records, before I tell you about the financial connection that took me 20 minutes online to locate and 4 months for investigators to confirm, I want to ask you something. Do you think I was responsible for what happened to that family? Not legally, morally. Drop responsible or circumstances in the comments. I have read every answer people have given me, and none of them are wrong, and all of them hurt in different ways. I called a state insurance investigator on a Monday morning in April. I brought counsel. I brought every document I had, the original field journal, the denial letter, the fraud referral, a printout of records linking my former supervisor to the salvage contractor who had bid on the Moss property 2 weeks before our denial letter was sent. I sat across a desk from a woman in her 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and I told her everything. Exactly as it happened, exactly where my failure was, exactly where I believed his was. I did not minimize my portion, and I did not exaggerate it. I had been a claims investigator for 31 years. I knew how to read a scene. This time, finally, I read the one in my own garage without looking away. My former supervisor was 71 and retired to a house outside Sarasota. The investigation took 4 months. The financial connection to the salvage contractor was real and documented, a consulting fee arrangement that predated the Moss claim and had been deliberately omitted from the regional review he claimed to have conducted. There had been no regional review. He had written the final determination himself, substituted it for my field report, and moved the claim through a procedural channel that allowed senior adjusters to finalize under certain circumstances without secondary oversight. He had exploited that channel. Albert Moss had gone to prison for a determination one man made alone in a back office in Nashville in December of 2006, and that man had retired to Florida and was living 30 minutes from a golf course. The state suspended his license retroactively. Civil action is ongoing. The Moss family's attorney, a woman from Memphis who took the case pro bono, filed for a posthumous vacatur of Albert Moss's conviction. It was granted in August. His name is clear now. What that word means when the man is already gone, I am still working out. My daughter and her husband are still married. I did not expect that, and I don't entirely know what to do with it. He came back in May. He had driven to his mother's house in Murfreesboro, his father's widow, a woman I'd never met, and stayed for 6 weeks. My daughter drove out to see him twice. I don't know what was said. She hasn't told me, and I haven't asked, because there are conversations that belong to a marriage, and a father doesn't have standing in them. just because it's painful to be excluded. What she told me the night she came home, after the second visit, is this. He said he stopped being able to hate you somewhere around month 4 of being married to me. And he said he didn't know what to do with that, and he didn't handle it right. She sat at the same kitchen table where the envelope had been opened, and she looked at me with her mother's face. The same eyes, the same particular stillness when something costs her a great deal to hold steady. I don't think I've processed it, she said. I'm not asking you to wait for me. I told her I had 30 years of practice at patience. Some of it, I said, was even warranted. She almost smiled. It was a pale version. It was there. I drove to Murfreesboro on a Tuesday in September. I parked in front of a ranch house with a flower bed along the front walk and a mailbox that still had the old last name on it in reflective letters. I sat in the car for 40 minutes. I had rehearsed several things to say. All of them felt wrong in the way that prepared statements feel wrong when the thing you're preparing for is actually real and standing in front of you. She answered the door on the second knock. She was in her early 60s with gray starting at her temples and the kind of posture that comes from years of holding yourself together when holding together was the only available option. She looked at me for a moment, and then she knew who I was, and the knowing moved across her face like weather. I did not ask for forgiveness. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for it. I told her my name. I told her I'd been the investigator on her husband's claim in 2006. I told her that the final determination had been made without my knowledge and contrary to my written recommendation, that I had brought documented proof to the state, and that her husband's conviction had been cleared. She already knew the last part. Her attorney had called in August. Then I told her what I hadn't told the investigators, what I hadn't told anyone except myself, in 2 a.m. conversations in a Nashville kitchen, that I had seen the note in my own field journal, that I had thought about requesting the documentation, that I had not requested it, that there is a name for the kind of failure that wears a good conscience like a coat, not corruption, not malice, just the careful everyday avoidance of the hard question at the exact moment the hard question matters most. She was quiet long enough that I heard a lawnmower start up somewhere down the street and stop. He used to say, she finally said, that the hardest part wasn't the men who lied. It was the men who didn't bother to look. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at something in the middle distance I didn't have access to. Then she looked directly at me. I'm not ready for anything yet, but I'm glad you came. I drove home on the interstate with the radio off and the windows cracked, and the late September light doing what it does in Tennessee when fall has just decided to commit. Long and golden, and completely indifferent to the weight of what's underneath it. Albert Moss's father was 52 when he died. He had grandchildren he never met. His son grew up into a man who loved my daughter genuinely and could not figure out how to live inside that love without also living inside the thing that had been done to his family. And he made choices that were wrong, and they were the wrong choices of a man trying to carry something too heavy alone. I am not the one to decide what his marriage to my daughter means or costs or requires going forward. That belongs to them. What belongs to me is simpler and harder than any of that. A note in a field journal written 20 years ago, 2 lines I knew were there and never went back to read. The space between recommend independent verification and the silence that followed it. That space had a man's life in it, his family's life, and I had moved past it every year without opening the box. His wife sent a photograph in early October, no message, just her phone number on the back of a card with a dried flower pressed to the corner. I don't know if I'll call. I don't know if she wants me to. I put the card in the desk drawer and the photograph on top of the desk, where I can see it when I sit down to the crossword every morning. He's wearing a work jacket. He's standing in front of a house that's still standing. He looks like a man who expected to be around for a while. He deserved to be around for a while. That's the truth I'm living with now. And the only honest thing I know to do with a truth like that is to stop walking past it.